Well, everybody, we've got Jonathan Bluestein with us today, and he's written quite a book about the martial arts. Research of the Martial Arts is the big title. And we have him here all the way from Israel on Skype. And Jonathan, I have to say that I'm so very happy and proud to have you on the show.
Well, it's an honor to be on the show.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And the listeners, on behalf of the listeners on the Martial Arts Nation, sorry, I want to send out a congratulations for quite a big job and quite a great job on your book.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much. It's very nice to hear that from people after having worked so hard at this book. It's been the work for over 5 years before I published the first edition, and I'm also
Wow.
currently working on an extended second edition that would see the book almost doubling in size, which is due to be published in about 1.5 years' time, or so I hope.
Well, good for you. Again, congratulations.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I'm a martial arts teacher and author hailing from Israel. I have my own martial arts academy in which I teach Xing Yi and Pigua Zhang, or Xing Yi and Pigua without the Chinese fancy Chinese tones. These are
Right.
two northern Chinese martial arts. I have studied these martial arts with my main teacher, that's Shifu Bluestein. He's a fellow Israeli, and with his teacher, late master Joe Jing, who just passed away suddenly this year from the onset
Oh,
of stroke and complications thereof, which was very saddening for all of us. And I've been.
absolutely. And not to interrupt, but I had my sensei passed away in the last 12 months as well, so I totally
Oh,
understand how you feel.
yeah, my condolences. It's a really big issue losing a teacher. It's really heartbreaking.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
So you're talking about your various martial arts, the two big ones that you train, and why did you choose to study these particular martial arts?
I started out with Western boxing, of all things, many years ago, and I really liked Western boxing for everything it's got. It's practical fighting in the ring, and it's great for fitness and gives you a very good fighting spirit. And it's a really good place to start martial arts because it's very martial in nature and just gives you the foundations of how to handle violence. Even though some would claim it's less realistic because of the gloves and the rules and everything, still, the mindset of boxing is truly up to the aggression of street fighting. Sometimes it's even more than that. And also, fighting psychology is embedded into boxing, even though it's not taught as psychology would be taught, like in universities. But you get it nailed down through the practice, through the endless sparring sessions. And after a while doing boxing, I had enlisted to the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, which has obligatory service by law. It's 3 years long for men and 2 years long for women. And after a while, after I finished boot camp, I had some time to train again. Still, when I looked back after I had some more time, I did not think of boxing the same way as I did before boot camp. Suddenly, after
Hmm.
boot camp, I had a renewed appreciation for my body, for my health, because it was so harsh and challenging. And
Sure.
and you work with weapons, and you realize the dangers of real life. And then I was looking for something that would not hurt me long term because boxing, as great as it is, most people who are doing boxing would quit by age 40 to 45, sometimes earlier, because of certain injuries. Often it's joint injuries or head injuries or whatnot. So I was
Right.
looking for
And in the right, and in the martial arts we can go until we can't go anymore physically.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and then at one point your body fails you. I mean, past a certain age, most people cannot maintain the levels of fitness required by a martial art like Western boxing. So I was looking for something more traditional because I figured that traditional martial arts would have a more holistic, health-based approach. And
Sure.
also yeah, and also because I'm a big theory guy. I like intricate theories, and I was looking for more depth, which I knew existed in the martial arts. So at the time I watched the old BBC documentary The Way of the Warrior. I believe it's from 1982. It's a great documentary series, which I'd also put on my YouTube channel, by the way. And I was watching this episode featuring Morio Higona Sensei, who is a famous karate teacher. He's still alive. I believe he's supposed to be in his mid 70s right at the moment. Very
Wow.
skilled and yeah, very skilled and well known and knowledgeable teacher, and a fantastic smiling character he's got. And I was just hooked by his Goju Ryu Karate, which I watched on that show. But at the time I want to study Goju Ryu, but I couldn't find a dojo near my place that was open that I could attend. And I ended up studying Shito Ryu Karate instead because a friend recommended it under Ichiko.
So there's two Okinawan martial arts right there.
No, no, no. There are actually quite a few Okinawan martial arts. There are
Yeah,
many,
but
many.
the ones that you just spoke about, I
Oh
mean,
yes, yes, yes.
Goju is so dynamic and such an amazing art, and then Shido-ryu, in my lineage, Shido became part of my training through Shotokan, and my sensei kind of merged them together in some aspects,
Mhm.
and so yeah, I totally dig what you're saying.
Yeah, so they're both fantastic Okinawan martial arts, and actually, you could claim that Shitoryu is a Japanese martial art because its founder Ken Wamabuni was an Okinawan, but he founded it in Japan and also continued to evolve the art in Japan, also based on a more Japanese mindset.
Yeah, and
Bef-
much like Gichin Funakoshi as well, right?
Yes, indeed, and they're also peers and colleagues, and they work together at times. So in any case, I studied Shitoryu Karate for a year and a half under Ichiko and Sensei, who had a major influence on me in terms of his teachings, more so than on the physical level, on the spiritual level, on the moral level. He's a very moral, strong moral character, and he was preaching, traditional martial arts morals, which greatly inspired me to become a better human being. But I
Right.
was
Like most of us, that's what draws a lot of us to the arts is to become better people and work on ourselves and challenge ourselves. So I totally understand that for sure.
Yeah, indeed, and you know what? That's something that's often missing from Chinese martial arts because Chinese martial arts have existed in the context of Chinese society. And oftentimes, if you are Chinese going to study under a Chinese teacher in China, you're already familiar with the martial virtue, this concept of how to behave well, how to be a decent human being in this culture. You already knew that because you were living in this culture. You didn't need many explanations. But the Chinese teachers did not do as good a job with that Buddha concept usually. Sometimes they did, but often they did not, importing that to the West. And in comparison, some teachers of Okinawa and Japanese traditions did an excellent job at conveying these martial virtues they had to Western audiences when these arts were imported to the West.
Sure, sure, I can understand that.
Yeah, so in a way, the Japanese were more forthcoming towards Westerners than the Chinese were ever willing to be, which you can also see with the history of China and Japan. That the Chinese were never as forthcoming towards Western powers as the Japanese from a certain point.
Absolutely, absolutely. As much as they were a closed off society for a long, long time, they always brought things into their thinking and to teach themselves and then kind of kept it to themselves
Yes, I think the
until
Japanese were.
until they actually came over.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Japanese with older sense of cultural superiority, which they share with the Chinese, They were more practical in adopting Western culture and technology and habits, while the Chinese still to this day often hold this notion that their culture is superior to everybody else's. And it's very evident if you live in China, and I've lived for about 6 months of my life on and off in China. And if you talk to Chinese people, you see that most of them still absolutely believe in the cultural and historical, if you could say something like that, cultural and historical superiority of the Chinese race. They're really educated to believe this notion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I mean,
So
are we in the West so different with America being the greatest country in the world? Sometimes we're not that different.
no, no. And I think that all countries have a respect for themselves. And I think that much like the martial arts, they think that, I mean, we're getting further away from it, which I really, really love and I really, really like. The tribalism, of the martial arts, and that comes from nationalism as well, right? So,
Yes.
I mean, Canada itself, in terms of a martial art, we don't really have anything unless we go to, say, Western Indian or First Nations, let's say. And there are tribes that did have a form of martial art, but other than that, we didn't have anything that is national to us. Whereas someone like, the Japanese have, of course, a multitude of different martial arts, that were nationalized, right? So,
Yeah.
so
I
the
think
superiority in the tribalism is there, right?
indeed, I think most nations used to have martial traditions, just lost them. At some point in England, the vast majority of the population used to know how to shoot bow and arrow. And nowadays,
Yes.
barely anyone in England knows how to. Or if we take
Hmm.
an example I really like from the Bible, in the Bible, I don't know if people at home know this, but in Israel, even in secular schools, most Israelis study the Old Testament for 11 years straight. So you know it quite
Wow.
well, and you said it in school. Yeah, sometimes it's somewhat religious. Other times it's more scholarly. It just depends. So in any case, there's a very famous quote I like in the Bible where it says that Samson hit the Philistines shin upon thigh. Now that's a proverb, meaning in Hebrew when you say shin upon thigh, you mean that he hit them hard. He really hit them down. But if you think about it, what's shin upon thigh? That's a low kick, man.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah, yeah. But if you ask religious Jews or religious Christians who are not affiliated with martial arts, they never think about that. Like shin upon thigh, yeah, a low kick. It wouldn't come to their mind. But for the people who had written this text, who had written the story of Samson, it was an obvious reality that he used a low kick. That's the meaning of it. So you see, even in biblical times, the Israelites probably had these martial arts, but it got lost over the centuries.
Absolutely. Now, just to get back to,
Yeah, yeah.
your martial training,
Yes. So
the go ahead, sorry.
after my time doing karate, I was still looking for answers, which is why I left. I really like my teacher, and I'm still on good terms with him. We're good friends, and I felt through my research, I was reading many books at the time and watching many videos that somehow the internal martial arts of China had some of the answers I was looking for, and I went around and was looking for a new teacher, and I saw many Taiji and Bagua teachers whom he did not connect with enough on a personal level. And then I met Nitsan, my Xing Yi teacher, who just seemed to um, be the embodiment of what he was teaching. And he really knew in depth um, what his art was about. So you know this. What I call this is a person who has gotten a full transmission. If you had gotten a full transmission, that means that you spent a few years with a teacher studying usually privately or semi-privately or small groups, and you've gotten the art on a very deep level. It's in your tissues, it's in your flesh. You are the art, and this kind of transmission, this kind of full transmission, can only be gotten with traditional teachings. And if you had gotten something like that and you meet a person who'd also gotten a full transmission, then you know that person has something special, not about them necessarily, but they're holding on to something special. And I had a
Sure,
hunch.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So I did not have any full transmission at the time in any art, but I had a hunch that this person had something. And indeed he had. And you know what? At the time I was considering studying Chen Taiji. And Shifu Nitzan told me something which would sound very provocative. He said, if you study Xing Yi and train it every day, and you train well for 5 years, if you then go about and practice Taiji for another 5 years, you'd likely be better than you would have been if you only practiced Taiji for 10 years. Or you
Right,
might even
right.
be better than.
I think that makes sense because you're getting a more rounded styling. You're getting different concepts. You're not just getting one set of concepts. You're getting two different, three different concepts, right? So
Yeah.
that's gonna round you out as a martial artist.
Yeah, so at the time, I reasoned that this was I did realize that this was a controversial statement, but I did not oppose it. Instead, I told myself, well, we just have to wait and see. Let's
So
do
here,
what he
so
says.
here's a question for you.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
your Sifu asked you or said this to you, when was that? Because I think, based on what we said about the tribalism of different martial arts, that's kind of an important question. Because if you were told the same thing today, it would be a little bit different. It wouldn't be as controversial because we're willing to learn from other systems now, way more so than we used to, right?
Yes, indeed. It was a leap of faith. He told me that during my first introductory class. And I chose to believe him, and I'm very glad I did.
Absolutely, it's great. It's great. So, based on the Chinese systems that you've studied, what's there to gain from studying and practicing teaching like the three arts together?
Oh, okay. We're talking about three arts, and then I failed to mention Jook Mantis yet. So after a few years studying with Shifu Nitan,
It was
um,
you said it really quickly, so just so that the listeners know, it's Mantis,
yes,
right?
Southern
So
Mantis.
is that a
Yeah, yeah.
northern or a southern art?
Yeah, well, I'll explain that in a moment.
Okay, sure.
So after a few
Sorry,
years,
I'm
yeah,
jumping ahead of you. Sorry about that.
yeah, no problem. So after a few years of Shifu Nitan, he had a baby boy, and he got very busy attending to his newborn, and they couldn't spend much time with him any longer because he did not teach martial arts for a living. He has a traditional Chinese medicine clinic. That's his profession. He's also a great researcher in this field of study, and I was looking for someone new to study from. Actually, it's a very interesting story. The first thing I did was to go back to China to study with Zhou Shifu and Nitzan's teacher, my grand teacher actually. And this had been the third time I studied with him. And I went there and trained with him for 2 to 4 hours a day every day for 2 months. And then I had a sort of premonition, and it's the only event in my life where I could really say that I felt that something's gonna happen. I felt that Joshua was not alright, that something was not okay with him and with the arts, and I could not really point my finger at it. And I told Josephu and I told my teacher, I said to them that Josephu does not look well, that I think that something's wrong with him, and they didn't. They could not believe it because the guy was uh, supposedly healthy looking, and he was doing his martial arts and teaching every day. He was very strong, and no one else took it seriously. And then he unfortunately passed away a few months later.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
yeah, and this innate sensation, this feeling that something's up, just led me to find a new path, not to replace my old teachers, just to do something extra. Just find someone else to study from. Also
Sure.
because yeah, I also knew that it would probably be a while before I go back to China and before Shifuni-san could give me some more teachings here in Israel. So I ended up becoming a student of Sifu Sapirtal, who's a disciple of Master Henry Pui from the United States, and he practices and teaches Juklum Southern Mantis, which is a very interesting system that has many similarities to my Xing, and it's a very highly developed internal martial art that most people are not familiar with. And
So
that's the
it's
third.
complementary to the training that you had previous.
Yeah,
That's the
it's
big key here, right?
yeah, that's one of the big reasons that I chose to study this art was because it was very complementary to my previous Shingi training. It's not as compatible with my Pigua, maybe not at all even, but it's very compatible with my Shingi. And I do not pretend to know a lot about the system or be able to teach it by any means, but I am currently diligently practicing it. So these are the three
Well, I
martial
was
arts.
wondering, yeah, sure. And I was wondering if you could share, if you know of a video or share a video maybe on YouTube or something like that, just to have the listeners have a look at it so they know what you're talking about it. And what I'll do is I'll attach it to the show notes so that they can kind of make a reference. Because normally when someone thinks about mantis, they think about, the cocked hands and things like
Yes.
that. So we want to make sure that we understand what you're saying, right? So if you do have something, maybe that you could send to me either as a video or if there's something on YouTube, pop me
Yeah.
off the link and I'll add it to the show notes, okay?
Yeah, sure. I'll send you a video, and I also encourage the listeners to do a YouTube search for Henry Pui. Pui is Poo, is Yee. Henry Pui.
Okay.
Pui is a nickname, and there should be at least 2 or 3 good videos of him on YouTube. Other than that, there are not so many good videos of Juklum Mantis available online because it is a Hakka system. The Hakka are a minority from southern China, and they had been very, very traditionally secretive about their martial arts training, so they're not fans of releasing videos of what they do.
No, that's cool. We respect that for sure. But if, like I said, if you have something you could pass on to us, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. And if you want to watch videos of late Master Joe, then you can just go on my own YouTube channel by just YouTube searching Jonathan Bluestein, and there are probably over 100 videos of him on my channel. Most are just excellent and very fun to watch, so you'd have a great time watching these. So back to our previous discussion, you asked about what are the advantages of practicing several systems, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sounds like you've got a wealth of knowledge, and each system within itself is hard to teach by itself.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So that's why I thought I would ask, what are your feelings about that?
You should have systems that are complementary to each other, and it also helps a lot if you were taught these systems by the same teachers. So I was taught the Pigua and Xing Yi systems by the same 2 teachers, and then the Mantis system is also has many similarities with my Xing Yi. So this helps being able to learn, train, and teach these systems at once. Now, there are a few other things here. With the Pigua system, it's a rather small system. It has few forms, and it doesn't contain a very, very wide arsenal of techniques and movements. it's a concept-based system, which is interesting because it's a very externally oriented martial art, external martial art, does not have any internal training components. I do teach internal training components to my advanced Pigua students based on the Xing Yi I teach, but they did not originate from the Pigua itself. And once you nail down the principles of this art, then it's very easy to practice and teach. And also, things within the art are so similar among themselves, that if you do one thing, that's already like practicing three or four other things. So you can be strategic about your training if you have systems that are structured like that. So I can
Right,
focus,
right.
yeah, I can focus most of my attention on the Xing Yi and my Mantis, which share many commonalities in the way you hold the body. So when you train one, it's really very close to training the other. And then with the Pigua system, you just don't have to train it as much because you don't have as much material in it to begin with. Though there
Hmm.
is lots of weapons training in Pigua, which is fascinating. And Pigua's weapons are also unique in that they're battlefield weapons. So oftentimes in Chinese martial arts,
I'm
and
sorry,
also
they're
in
which? They're which?
the weapons used in Piguajang are battlefield weapons, meaning that their usage was intended specifically for battlefield combat, as
Right,
opposed
okay.
to fighting within cities or small rooms or neighborhoods, stuff like that. And
Right,
often in
and we've had discussions here on the show. Okay, I actually have two questions here. Well, not
okay,
really questions. One's a statement and one's a question.
yeah.
So we've had discussions on the show about historical significance of martial arts,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
when one trains in a martial art, they should try to understand the history and the culture behind it so that they can understand why they do the techniques or how they do the techniques. And what you're saying is historically and culturally, the weapons were made for the battlefield,
Yes,
right?
yes, indeed. Yeah, especially the Miao Dao sword, which is a big two-handed sword that looks very much like a Japanese katana with slight design modifications. And it also has a history with the Japanese and the samurai and Japanese katanas. I've written an article about this. The article is called, listeners can Google it, The Brilliance of the Chinese Longsword. The Brilliance of the Chinese Longsword. It's a technical and historical article about this sword, the Miao Dao, which has been gaining lots of renewed popularity in China over the last decade.
Well,
This
let
sword,
send us that link as well, and I'll add it to the show notes.
yeah, sure. So, this sword was promoted originally by General Qi Guang. Qi Guang was a very famous Chinese general. We're talking about the 16th century, if I'm not mistaken. And at that time, and the Chinese were attacked on two fronts. On the coastlines, mirroring Japan, there had been major attacks by Japanese pirates, wokou, which the Chinese derogatorily called dwarf pirates. They called the Japanese dwarves. You know these nations are historically not fond of each other.
No, they're
Um,
not at all.
yeah,
Or they weren't at one point. I mean, it's
yeah,
very
and
historic. There's lots of history between these two nations, that's for sure.
yeah. Well, so that's beside the point. I have quite a few stories about how Chinese treat Japanese in China nowadays, but
Yeah,
that
that's a whole other podcast.
yeah. Well, so back on topic. These Japanese dwarves happen to use really big weapons. So their katanas at the time were often very long. They're what you'd call a nodachi nowadays, or an o katana. Uh, Basically a Miao Dao. And General Qi Jiguang figured that if they want to fight the Japanese pirates, they have to adopt their weapon designs and methods. And he integrated some weapon concepts and techniques and methods from the Japanese, and made the Chinese swords very similar and at roughly the same lengths. And it worked brilliantly. And indeed, Qi Guang was able to use army troops armed with these swords to fight off the pirates. Famously, it's very well documented historically.
That's really this is really cool information. I didn't know that they were that closely related.
Yeah, they were, and some, and there are quite a few sources talking about this. Some Chinese sources claim that the Japanese then copied the Miao Dao designs, and then the Japanese sometimes claim the other way. Um, there are also claims that a Japanese Koryu style, Shinkageryu, was influenced by this Miao Dao practice. But we can't verify any of this nowadays, so it's just competing sources making opposite claims. But it is obvious that these armies did influence each other. These military forces, because Chi Ji Wan had an army, but the other guys were just very large bands of pirates. And Qi Jiguang
Right.
also utilized the Miao Daos successfully to fend off invaders from the north at roughly the same time. So it had been proven to be a very useful weapon on the battlefield. And then a few centuries later, it became incorporated into the Piguazhang system by Guo Changshang. My Pigua lineage is from Guo Changshang, and then when he and the Ma family integrated a few weapons into the Pigua system, which apparently had been an empty-handed system, they also put in the Miao Dao techniques and methods, the unique body mechanics of Pigua. So nowadays you've got in Pigua the Miao Dao techniques and methods that date back to Qi Ji Guang to the 16th century. However, the way the sword is wielded is with the unique mechanics of this martial art.
That is so cool. That's really really cool. So they've taken historical weaponry, put it into the system. The three systems that you take, they're integrated in certain ways, but how do you go about teaching these arts in your academy in Israel?
Yeah, well, before I address that, I just want to say just another thing concerning the integration of these systems. I think they complement each other just brilliantly. I mean, um, the Shingi has a very strong psychological aspect to it. The training of Zhang and the internal methods of Shingi really force you to work on yourself as a person, as a human being, and be transformed. What's called in Taoism, they called it a Neidan, this internal work that transforms the human spirit, your own soul. And then the Jook Mantis takes the aggression, the short range aggression of Xing, and it takes it a step farther, and it teaches you how to use it even more effectively at times, minus some of the footwork, and how to gain the ability to take the internal work of Shingi to its fullest potential, I believe. And then the Pigua takes an entirely different route in terms of fighting. It's unlike Shingi and the Jook Mantis, which are very closed and like the short distances and just rooting in place and slamming at the enemy. The Pigua is all over the place. It's a touch and go. You touch his limbs and you go around him and you swirl about. It's very oftentimes Pigua techniques might look like Baguazhang techniques, and the Pigua footwork and its snappiness and the looseness of the movement really contributes quite a lot to the Shingi and Juklum systems. So, for instance, in Juklum Mantis, you're supposed to have whipping power, but when you use movements with and structure which are so tight and so and you twist your own tendons and connective tissue on the inside so fiercely, it's very difficult to develop a looseness in your movement, a whipping quality, a true relaxation, like you
Well,
develop in Tai Chi.
I can actually touch on that just a little bit and say that my background is Shotokan karate mixed in with some Shito-ryu. but I also started taking Wing Chun.
Hmm.
And when I first started, of course, with the very hard uh, punching, of Shotokan karate versus the chain punching of Wing Chun, trying to kind of fit the mindset between the two martial arts when I first started to train, I was too tight to effectively chain punch, right?
Yeah, well, yeah,
So I think that's what you're trying to say, right? Is you're trying to say that these complement each other because there is looseness in one system, and I don't want to use the word hard because hard and soft, right? But there's
no,
a
but there is
looseness and a
hardness.
and a strength,
It's
right?
correct. It would be correct, especially in Jook Mantis. There is lots of hardness. There is hard qigong, and you're supposed to find the softness within the hardness and practice some very hard techniques in order to reach that softness. Now, it's a different type of hardness. You're supposed to actually tense yourself from the inside using mostly connective tissue like tendons and fascia, and not overly tensing your muscles, just not excessively doing that. But that's very challenging to reach softness in that way, in my opinion. And the example you brought forth with Shotokan karate and Wing Chun is an excellent one, I think. So in Okinawan martial arts, you've got this proverb that says ichigeki hissetsu. Ichigeki hissetsu mean one strike, certain death. So you're constantly trying to be this ramming machine where you would set up the perfect strike and end the fight with that one perfect move. And it's very reminiscent of the Japanese mindset of judo, I think, that you set up this one perfect move that's gonna end it all in one go. And Wing Chun is takes a different approach. It's gonna slam him from all different directions and many times until he goes down, and it doesn't try to force its way but just bite him one piece off at a time.
Right, exactly. So again, with the complementary and these three systems, when you're teaching it, is there a strict curriculum?
Yes, there is. Well, the Jook Mantis I do not teach at the moment. It would take a few more years for me to be able to do that. The
Hmm.
Pigua Zhang and the Xing Yi, uh, for each I've built a very structured curriculum based on 12 steps. Now, it's not an hierarchical curriculum in the sense that if a student reaches, say, level 6 out of 12, and another student is at level 3 out of 12, that doesn't make the other student necessarily superior because he's more advanced in level. What these 12 levels for uh, each system are about is helping the students know how much they know of the system, how much in terms of the just the plain curriculum. So these arts I was taught with a curriculum already, but it was not segregated into steps like I did with my students. And I've also printed out these 12 steps for learning each system, and I put them on the wall of my academy so every student could see where they're at, and at the end of each class I actually take them to the wall and show them, well, this is what we've learned, this relates to this and that level, and this is what you need to get to the next level. And it's just about them knowing where they stand. That's what's important to me.
Yeah, and as a student, that's really quite important because they want to feel like that they are progressing, and they want to know not necessarily how long something is going to take, but I'm kind of like that because I'm a little impatient. but but I know exactly what you mean, and they become to trust you even more, than they already did. The longer they train and the more that you get them involved with their training and knowing where the next step is and so on and so forth, it makes them want to train harder.
Yeah, indeed. And you know what? I get this Western mindset that you ask Western people, we want to know where we're going. We want to see, like, to be able to envision the end result. So, even more like on when I printed out these 12 steps for each art, these 12 steps are on a table, and on the table is also a sort of timetable that says, okay, if you train twice a week, it's going to take you this and that amount of time to reach level 4. And if you train 4 times a week, and if you train every day, there is a difference. So there is one column for 2 times a week, another column for 4 times a week, and another column from for every day at least 2 hours a day. And then you could see, like, okay, so level one is gonna take you, say, um, just 1 month if you train every day 2 hours a day, 2 months if you train 4 times a week, and 4 months if you only train twice a week.
Yeah, and that's really good for students because it gives them, goals, and it gives them some idea about if they want to. I don't want to use the word master a system, but you know what I mean, right? Like
Yes,
it
yes.
gives them that feeling that, hey, it is attainable. I can do this. And that's a really good way to, like I said, create the relationship with your students. That's for sure, for sure.
Yeah, and oftentimes, teachers get it the wrong way. Students come to them and ask them, like, how much time is going to take me to master the system? And most students do not really mean they want to master the system. What they mean to ask is, how much time is it going to take me to study the full curriculum? Now, teachers take this the wrong way, and they tell them something like, oh, you can never master the system. Oh, train for at least 30 or 40 or 50 years. And that's just the wrong answer to give a beginner student oftentimes, because they're not gonna take it well. They're just gonna think, oh, I just might as well give up. Like, 30 years, 50 years, come on. And instead, you can give them just another answer. You could say, okay, you know what, it takes a lifetime to master the system, but if you train for 5 or 6 or 7 years, you could probably learn most or all of the curriculum. Now, that's a better answer, in my opinion. That's also more helpful for the student.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the connection between you and that student, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's move on to your book here. Uh, why did you want to call it Research of Martial Arts?
Well, I think, when you look at martial arts literature, oftentimes a martial arts book is a teacher's journal. It's a teacher deciding, usually not based that it's there's no financial motive. I mean, I do not believe that most martial arts teachers write books before because they think they're gonna get rich. No one thinks that, but they do kind of publish the book because they just want to put their thoughts out, and it reads as, okay, here's my opinion of martial arts. That's my journey. That's my thing. And my book is not like this. My book had been um, more than just my own personal journey in the martial arts, a real piece of research. So it addresses subjects as diverse as anatomy, physiology, kinesiology, psychology, physics, of course, martial methods and training methods, and cutting edge science and philosophy and history and whatnot. Because my goal had been to create a book that would save people the time of having to do what I did, which is to just read through hundreds of books and thousands of articles just to get the answers they were looking for, the answers that they could not get from their teachers. Because, I mean, you cannot get a teacher that has all the answers. I don't have all the answers. And so at one point you have to go look for answers outside of your school, because the teacher cannot give you all the answers, and you look in videos and you look in literature and magazines and various articles online, and you ask other people and you train with other martial artists and whatnot.
Well,
And this
it's
whole
it's it's 418 pages long.
oh yeah,
You,
that's quite
you,
a
you
lot.
know that's it's quite an endeavor. I can't even imagine. like you said, you stepped out of your own comfort zone, going to different martial artists and ask questions and learn more about other things. It's a well-rounded thought process, things like that. Now, I'm a little confused because I did have a look at it. You did, in all your graces, send me a copy, and I thank you so very much for doing that. It's definitely something that I'm going to be constantly going back to. Okay, but I'm not getting a sense that it's an instructional book. It's not. It's not that, right?
No, it's not. So my
So
point had
go ahead.
been not to replace someone's teacher. If you want instruction in the martial arts, then you need to get the hands-on thing. You can't really learn in depth from videos or books or whatnot. You have to get real instruction by getting someone to touch you, to talk to you, to convey onto you something that's beyond the physical, that's beyond language. What the Japanese call ishin denshin, that's heart to heart transmission. That's a transmission in the martial arts that's more than the sum of its parts. That's the real full transmission that you get when you do martial arts in traditional manner with a teacher for quite a few years. And I did not want to have that in the book because that you got to get from a real teacher. What I wanted people to have in the book is those answers they cannot get from the teacher, or they needed some alternative explanations for, or a way to look at martial arts from the point of view of science or philosophy of or psychology, as I said before. And what the book does is provide the reader, which could be any martial artist of any style or level of experience, an ability to access and think and analyze his or her martial arts from entirely new and novel points of view, which are often not at all found in martial arts literature.
Right. And I really like the idea that you're taking from different ideas like psychology, right? And physiology and all of those things, and you've put it together so neatly and tidily in this book that, like you're right, like you said, that doesn't matter the level of martial artist, doesn't matter the style in which they're taking. It's a good book for everybody that is a martial artist, someone who not only trains in the arts but also tries to live it daily. So when I
Yes,
say
of course.
martial artist in this respect, it's the true martial artist, not just someone who goes to train to, you know, uh, be fit, or it's definitely got to be somebody who's going to challenge themselves, correct?
Yes, indeed. Well, if you had been living 300, 400 years ago in Europe, then by all means, any martial training you would have had would have been used in your daily life without question. But for most people living today, they would not come to use their martial arts in daily life in terms of their martial aspects. So, what are these martial arts for? Besides fitness and fun and a sense of community, etc., etc. Well, you can still use them in your daily life if you know how to. And if psychology is a very good example, and I'll bring it up because you mentioned it, the psychology of martial arts is the internal process that you undergo with yourself and your surroundings, and your ability to transform who you are as a person through the training. And this is often totally neglected in the practice of martial arts. You get the tools to do it, but you do not get the explanations of how to do it, of how the martial arts truly relate to who you are, and how you can use the same tools you use at the guan or the dojo to make yourself a better human being. And in my opinion, this is a key aspect of the art, and it has always been. Even when the arts were primarily used martially, still, if you live to tell about it, then if you live to train for, I don't know, like 10, 20, 30 years, your whole life, then the point being is if you survive, you should also allow the arts to change you from within. And the key point here, the key element is to subdue to the will of the art. Because what we do in the West often is people come to martial arts with the conception that they would just do the martial arts the way they want to do them. So it's like a weightlifting gym. So you go to the gym, and you lift weights just the way you want to. I mean, some person just go and go do all these machines. Another person would be a professional powerlifter. Another would be a bodybuilder. Another would be an amateur in these things. Another would just do weight training for his basketball training, etc., etc. So this is you choosing who you want to be in the gym and how the gym's gonna uh, bend its own structure around you and your will and what you want to achieve. But if you study a traditional martial art and you study it the correct way, then you do not bend the art around your needs. Instead, you have to bend yourself to become the art. After you had become the art, then you can transform the art in a way that expresses yourself as well. But at the beginning stages, the first few years of training in each and every martial art, the most important thing for um, developing yourself is to abide by the laws of the art and let it become and let the you become it.
And what you're saying is that it's really hard to find, from a personal perspective, it's really hard to find someone that can give you that total transmission.
Yeah, indeed,
But
because
because that would be the total transition or transmission, correct?
this is part of a full transmission. Of course, a full transmission of the art first and foremost concerns the art, the technical aspects of the art. But a real full transmission also includes um, a way for the art to transform you from the inside, not just on the physical level, and teaching you how to physically transform other people. So a person who had gotten a full transmission in martial art should also be capable of using his art in a non-violent way to transform other human beings if he or she want to, if they become teachers, because not everybody become teachers. But even if they're not teachers, they should be able to use the art and its principles and its innate abilities to transform other human beings in their daily lives.
So, what, in your opinion, and this is a contentious subject with a lot of martial artists, but what, in your opinion, is the difference between an internal and an external martial art?
Well, that's a very controversial and challenging question. I would say that at least a third of my book is dedicated to answering this one. Now, to put it shortly, there are not really internal and external martial arts. What there are internal and external methods of training. So, what I did in my book is actually not to talk about the internal or external natures of the martial arts. Instead, I had written about countless methods of training which I had classified as either external or internal. Now, what would make a martial art so called externally oriented or internally oriented? That would be the amount or the ratio between external techniques and methods and internal techniques and methods. So, Tai Chi Chuan or Tai Chi would be called an internally oriented martial art because most of the methods and techniques and principles it would be using are so called internal. However, if we look at Western boxing, because most of the methods and principles and techniques it uses are external, that then it is externally oriented. Now, that is not to say that any martial art is purely external or internal. That would be incorrect. Every martial art out there has both internal and external elements. It just so happens that a lot of martial arts have a strong inclination to one side, to the yin or yang of things. That is why I have termed them externally oriented or internally oriented. Now, there are also those arts which feature a greater balance between external and internal methods. And these arts I have termed combination styles because they have a greater balance between this and that. Now, if we look at external and internal mindsets and methods and principles of training, we could just give just very simple examples. So, if we look at externally oriented martial arts, what you'd see is that they would most often use what you'd think of as fitness or strength training exercises as they are used in Western sports, and they would use them to a great extent, either as seen in Western sports or in a similar fashion, to enhance their physical abilities, their martial
Right,
abilities.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
So.
and I think you're right when you're talking about Western society, and if I may, and this is just my opinion, is that Western society wants to put a label on things. We
Mhm.
want to call something something. It may not be this or that, but we want to put a label on it. So, do you think that from the Western standpoint, do you think that's why we say, oh, that's an internal art or that's an external art?
In a sense, yeah, that's a Western distinction. However, I did write a lot about it in the book because it is very useful, actually. The problem was not that the distinction was made between external and internal methods, because there is a difference and different methods of as such exist. However, the problem came about because people want to see a martial art as completely internal or completely external, or they would say that a martial art is necessarily superior to another because it uses more external or more internal methods, both which assumptions are totally incorrect. So that had been the problem. Now it's also a matter of language. So, for instance, in Chinese, you'd have many words to describe different types of power. So this is a snappy power, an inch power, a shaking power, a bouncy power, an expanding power, a collapsing power, a chopping power, and cutting power, stuff like that. And they would use all of these separate terms to describe different types of powers behind strikes within a martial art. But if you look at
Hmm.
English terminology for martial arts, then mostly a punch is a punch. There is no referencing for specific powers behind the punch. Now, because the language is different, you also start to think differently and train differently. Because if you refer to different types of powers, then you can also think about different methods to develop them separately and then combine them together. But if a punch is just a punch, and power is power, you have power behind your punch, or you don't have power behind your punch, then it matters less all these theoretical intricacies that mostly interest traditional Chinese martial arts, and especially the internally oriented arts. Such things do not matter for people engaged in Greco-Roman wrestling or Western boxing.
Right. So what you're saying is exactly what we spoke about before, and that is the cultural roots of the cultural and historical roots of the given martial art that we're training in. Because, for an example, like you said, a punch is a punch. Now, when I trained in Shotokan, there was different terms for power, but not as many in the Chinese, right? So you'd have linear power, you'd have upward, downward power, you'd have vibration and rotation, those kinds of things. But
This
you
is
could
very
use,
good. This is
right?
often absent from Japanese and Okinawan karate. Most teachers do not talk about it.
Yeah, I found my instructor. Now, again, I generalize, okay, but my instructor was very cognizant of the physicality of the martial art, right? So the physics behind the martial art, very big on the physics, right? So he tried to visualize or figure out a way to explain to us what vibration is, or what rotation is and what does it mean to have upward and downward power, right?
Hmm.
Especially myself, who, I always joke that I'm 100, I was normally between 135 and 145 in pounds. That's how
Yeah.
much I weigh, right? And when I trained for tournament, I would be, 150, 155. So I'm not a big man at all. I'm very small. So I have to generate as much power as I can, especially speaking in terms of karate, right? So
Yeah.
to kind of visualize that, then that really helps. So again, it's the instructor, right? It's not just the art itself. Much like you teaching, you have delved into what makes the martial art, and you've expanded on that as more especially with this book, and I applaud you for that.
Yeah, thank you again. Yeah, indeed. As you said, the teacher is more important than the art. So choosing the correct teacher, especially someone who you can identify with and relate to and be on good terms with, is much more important than choosing an art that you find fanciful or to your liking in the beginning.
Right, exactly. So I don't want to take up a ton of your time,
No,
okay?
no, sure, you can speak
And
freely.
and I'm so glad that you've given us this opportunity. Now, you have something that you cover in your book that I was really a little bit confused about, and I wanted to just touch base on that, and it's called fascia.
Yeah,
Can you
fascia.
explain what fascia is and how it relates to what you talk about throughout the rest of the book?
Okay, so with regard to fascia, that's a Latin word, and that's used in Western anatomy, and it describes something. Well, you could imagine transparent wrapping paper that you'd use for food, for sealing up food. So imagine something like that that's very strong and stretchy and resilient, that would not easily rip, and that comes in different thicknesses. That's a fascia in your body, and it is used by the body to wrap different things. A few layers of fascia wrap around internal organs and can wrap around tendons and muscles, etc. These connective tissues help you generate power in the body and mitigate different pressures and control your ability to expand and contract the body without moving. Now, normally these kinds of tissues are not under conscious control. So in order to gain a high level of proficiency in controlling them, you have to use special methods. The thing with the internally oriented arts is they have many methods geared towards changing the structure of fascia and tendons. And once you change the structure of these connective tissues, that sort of structure tends to last a long time. Normally for tendons, I wouldn't know for fascia, I'm not sure, but for tendons, it takes a tendon about 3 years to change in a major way. So if you start martial arts training in a certain art now, and you want to get the structure of the art, it's gonna get at least 3 years of dedicated practice to really nail down the structure of the art if it's new to you. And it's no coincidence that in many traditional Chinese martial arts, they talk about this 3 year benchmark, that it takes you 3 years of dedicated daily practice to get the structure and the feel of the art. And I believe that relates to the time it takes the fascia and tendons and other connective tissues to change. Now, the fascia are also they have a strong link with traditional Chinese medicine, with the meridians and the acupuncture points. So many acupuncture points are situated at what's called fascia cleavage points. So these are major key intersections on a given strip of fascia, or where a few fascia meet together. And, well, unsurprisingly, the acupuncture point happens to be just there at the right spot, where it would influence the fascia at the utmost. So you can see that Chinese medicine was up to this thousands of years ago already, that you can use needles to and other methods to manipulate the fascia to influence and affect the entire body. Now, a good
Now
example.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
stop you right there just for a second,
yeah,
Jonathan,
yeah.
and ask and just throw a generalization in here with a question saying that it is I find it so interesting that whenever I speak to a Chinese martial artist, okay, I don't really want to put it that way. I mean, the Chinese arts, that the holistic side of things is so important to them opposed to a Japanese stylist, right?
Yeah.
And I just find it so fascinating, sorry, the mindset that you must be in to kind of get down to this root, and this root being the fascia. I mean, you're getting right, you're almost at a micro level when you're thinking about training, right? So I find that very interesting, the difference between the two cultures in terms of holistic training. Every it just seems like every Chinese system stylist, the conversation gets to this point. Now, over the past couple of years, and more, and especially more recently, I'm hearing about more and more people are getting away from the religious or the holistic, and getting down to the practicality of things in terms of the use of that particular martial art. How do you feel about that, and what do you think it is going to happen in the future in terms of how we're explaining uh, our growth, much like the fascia?
Well, the holistic approach in Chinese martial arts has its roots in Chinese culture and especially in Taoism. One has to understand that Taoism is the oldest, still readily practiced philosophy and way of life in China today. Now, unlike in the West, Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism are originally not religions. Even Buddhism, which is widely practiced as a religion, if you look at stories about the Buddha, they're about becoming an embodiment of God yourself, being an enlightened person, a Buddha. That's not quite what you would expect hearing from the monotheistic religions. So I think the three of these traditions, Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism, are more about a way of life than they are about religion. So that's for starters.
So
Now,
more of
especially
a
that.
philosophy, more of a
Yeah,
philosophy than an actual religion, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
when you say the philosophy, I tend to think of someone like Alan Watts, for an example, who
Yeah,
says,
yes.
Buddhism is the religion that is not religion.
Yes, indeed.
It's the non-religion, right?
Yeah. So going back on track now, Taoism especially has a very holistic view of life, taking for granted that everything has yin and yang in it, and an inclination to either yin and yang. And you see, it's very similar to the concept of, well, there are internal methods and external methods. There's a yin and yang, and everything has both, but is more inclined to one side. And no art is perfect and or perfectly balanced. Now, I think the Chinese have taken for granted this holism based on their own culture. And there are no flaws in this perception of reality. It is just that in the West, we often like the cultural background and especially the language to be able to understand what the Chinese meant. So it's not about changing the way holism is perceived in the martial arts. In the martial arts, I think that what would happen, what is happening, is that Westerners, especially Western teachers of the traditional Chinese martial arts, are slowly learning to convey this holistic approach with Western terminology and words, which is to a great extent what I've been trying to do with my own book. Now, as you were also mentioning the challenge of going on the micro level, which indeed you do in the internal Chinese martial arts while training. So how can you think about this just one connective tissue while you're doing all this other stuff? It makes no sense at all when you think about it. But it's not the way it's trained. The way it's taught is different. Instead of doing it the Western way and thinking about, oh, this tiny wrap inside my wrist, it's supposed to be aligned this or that. The Chinese understood that such thinking um, was not going to get anyone anywhere. So instead, what they did was to use colorful imageries of what you're supposed to do. So a very famous example, if you stand in Hunyuanzhuang, or as it's more widely called nowadays, Changbaozhuang, which is Hunyuanzhuang is smooth roundness post, and Changbao Zhuang is tree hugging post. So you know what I'm talking about? These people standing shoulder width with their hands in the air, looking as if they hug a ball or a tree. Right? You've seen this
Right.
before.
Yeah,
So
I'm familiar with that one.
so,
Yeah.
so when you train that, and that practice, by the way, originated from Taoist practices. From there it got to Xing Yi, and in recent times, over the last few decades, quite a few Chinese martial arts, including Chen Tai Chi and even Pak Hok Pai or Lama Pai, have borrowed this training instrument because they found it so useful. So anyhow, back to how you train it. When you hold such a stance, initially when I teach it, I allow people to find correct alignment, and I teach them that, and they have to be able to stand with correct alignment for at least 40 minutes. 40 minutes sounds like a lot, but if your alignment is correct and you can rest upon your own structure, and most students, even beginners, can manage 40 minutes within 2 months' time. Some people can do it within 2 weeks, even. So it's very quick.
Hmm.
And once they can stand there for 40 minutes, the internal training begins. The use of intention, of yi, which I've written some more than 14 pages about in my book. Now, what is yi? Yi is using mental imagery to initiate different processes in the body. It's using your imagination, not in the way of guided imagination, but for actually changing how things work inside the body. So the most
Right.
simple example would be, while standing in this posture, Changbao Zhuang or Hunyuan Zhuang, is to imagine a ball, an inflatable beach ball that you hold while standing in a pool of water, and you can feel the texture of the ball and also the bounciness of the ball and also its willingness to sway a little bit from side to side and up and down. And you start with that. You start with even more simplified imageries. Now, it's not good for people to start thinking about it before they can stand for at least 40 minutes and before they are relaxed enough and have good alignment, because then they're going to do internal training with a messed up structure. But once they have it,
And that's not good.
and that's not good. That just builds bad habits. But once they have decent enough structure, which comes about really quickly, they can start using these imageries. And that's the first imagery you use out of over 50 I know. Seriously, there are over 50 different imageries used in the training of standing post of Zhang in my Xingyi system and in a few other systems that I've studied or seen or read or heard about. Now, what does it do when you hold that beach ball, that imaginary beach ball? After a while, you could actually feel it. Now it's not there. So what are you feeling? You are feeling is your own tension. You feeling the change in the muscle receptors that are on your muscles and your tendons and in your fascia, and you feel your own ability to go through from tension to relaxation on a very micro level. In the beginning, you just use this one imagery of the ball and you only do one thing with it. For instance, so in the beginning, you'd only press it downwards. You press it once and then you let go. You wait 2 or 3 seconds and you press it again. And may I remind you, it's inside of water, so it has a different quality to just holding a ball in the air. So over time, you add more and more imageries. Now, that takes away the need to think of the micro movements all the time, because you practice this ball thing and all its variations for I don't know, 1 or 2 or 3 months, and then you get used to the ball. It's just there. You just doing stuff with it all the time. It's like driving. You can drive and talk on the phone and do other stuff all the same time because you're used to it. So you can add another thing. So then you add
Now,
another image.
just to stop you there and tell the listeners that you shouldn't drive and talk on the phone, but you can.
Yeah. Yeah. I
But
mean, it,
I'm glad that we had an opportunity to talk, because when I had an opportunity to, I can't say that I've read the entire book, and I don't want to say that because that would be incorrect. And I don't really want to sit down and read the entire book all at once. It's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to learn. And you've done such an excellent job, in my opinion, putting that all together,
thank
right?
you.
And I don't want to take up too much more of your time, sir. So I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions that are kind of pertinent to the show
Yeah,
that
sure.
I love to ask people. And you know, one of the big things that I think about and what means a lot to me is just the general everyday life between a martial artist and someone who, you know, goes in to train, um, just to train and get the health benefits out of it, right? So
Yeah.
those people that are out there, they have a hard time to get in the dojo because they spend 8 hours a day in a cubicle, and the stresses of the day and family and going shopping after work and da 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 da. What is something you would say to somebody that was in a lull in their training? What's something that you would say to them to get them on the floor, to get the uniform on, to put the shorts and the t-shirt on and say, you know what, you're going to get there. So let's just do this. What would you say to them?
You know what? What drives us human beings? We are creatures of meaning. We want meaning in life. If someone has lost the meaning in what they do, they don't want to do it anymore. If there is no meaning in a relationship, if you cannot love anymore, then you don't want to maintain it. And if you have lost meaning in your martial art, then you have a problem. Then this person doesn't is not so keen on training anymore. So usually what happens is as follows. A person goes into a martial art taking it to be something. So he had seen these Bruce Lee movies or these Jackie Chan movies, or he'd seen MMA on TV or whatnot, and he goes
I'm
into
guilty. I'm guilty of that.
yeah, most of us are, and he goes into the school to study a martial art, and he has this understanding, he believes or she believes, in their mind of what this martial art or martial arts in general are about. Then, after a period of time that could be 2 3 weeks or it could be 5 years, the person realizes that the initial reason for him or her starting martial arts and the way they perceive the martial arts to be has nothing to do with what they are in reality. And now comes the crisis. Because sometimes it's just a really tiny few hour crisis, and sometimes it's an existential crisis. So if I got into martial arts for something and then they turn out to be something else entirely, is that something else something that I'm willing to spend so much time working on? And that's where a teacher should come into the picture. Sometimes people solve it, work it out by themselves on their own, but most of the time, to prevent the student from stopping his or her practice, the teacher needs to convey a certain level of enthusiasm onto them. And you could not just create this generic mold that fits everyone. You gotta know who your students are. You gotta know them on the personal level, and you gotta be able to understand what drives them and to give their meaning, to give meaning into their practice. Sometimes it also means that you have to let them go. But most of the time, if you're a good teacher and you care about your students, then you would be able to find these elements within your art that are vital for helping these people to improve their lives, their relationships, their work etiquette, their ability to make themselves into better human beings. And you can only do that if you tend to the relationships within your school, and if you really care about your students, and you have to watch for these students when they come to this point of crisis, and grab them for a long talk, perhaps more than one talk, and allow them to understand what this art can do for them and why it's important for them to keep on training. Now, a large part of that is also to get them doing a little bit of research, or doing the research for them, and letting them know about it. Because if people would not understand what the art is about, if they don't know anything about its history, they don't understand in depth its theory, the people who are behind it, what it can do, then there is no meaning behind it. Then there never will. And that's what you see in our martial arts that don't go this route. Oftentimes, I see this all the time in Krav Maga schools. What happens? Someone goes and studies this Krav Maga style for 20 years. Then, when he's teaching it, it's a new system. He creates a new system. He's the grandmaster of a new system. It happens all the time in Israel and everywhere abroad. Why? Because this martial art did not have a deep meaning to it. So they created a new meaning because they really liked it, but they created the martial art from scratch in their own image, which is the wrong way to do it. The whole point about martial arts is becoming the art's image and learning to change yourself from within, not creating something in your own image.
Right. And that all of that is that's all great answers. And I thank you for that. And I'm glad that you expanded on it, because whenever I ask that question, it's I have to say, like, your this interview, you are the second person across the Atlantic that I've interviewed, and a lot of people that I have been Westerners. So you give a fresh new look. Although some of the things that you're saying, you know, some of the people that I interviewed have that. But you're also giving us a fresh perspective. Now, here's the biggest question that I ask everybody, just about everybody, and that is, what if martial arts did not exist in your life? What would your life be like today?
Hmm. I would be an artist of a different kind, probably. I would be creating something else. I have made it mandatory in my teachings. I mentioned previously that I edited the curriculum of my arts each to 12 levels, right? So to reach
Right.
the 11th and 12th levels, one has to start engaging in other forms of art. Any form of art. It might be singing, or acting, or sculpting, or woodworking, or playing the piano, and architecture, anything you can think about. Because, like my good friend, so he says, if you want to get the real essence of martial arts, you need to do other arts as well. Because the arts in general, uh, they help each other. They create a bigger reality. They give you a fresh perspective. They allow you to gain a better insight into your own soul. So I engage in all sorts of other arts. My favorite being gardening, and gardening is fantastic. And I grow bonsai trees, and I have lots of vegetation at my own school in Israel, which I think is fantastic to have at any martial arts school, and I wish more teachers would do that. We even grow our own tea herbs, and we drink tea made from them. And if I was not a martial artist, I'd probably be an architect, or a musician. My family is full of musician, or do another art of some kind, and I would still probably be writing and be engaged in theory, because I am fascinated by systems, by the intricacies of sophisticated systems, and I think that I became a teacher partly because I find the human being to be the most elaborate, sophisticated, and fascinating system on planet Earth. And each and every human being who comes to my school and becomes my student, that person in himself or herself are a fresh new novel system of ideas, thoughts, emotions, stories to tell, life philosophies, etc. And they're just fascinating to figure out, and I'm very happy to help them figure it out on their own, because I don't want to be the guy molding them in his image, and I don't want to do the work for them. I want to give them the tools to do the work themselves, and then what, be standing on the side and watch them grow like I do with my plants. I give them water and earth and fertilizer, and I take care of them, but they do the growth on their own, and
Well,
that's
that's again, that's another great answer, and I do thank you for that. And Jonathan, you've enriched me for sure, and I know that you've taught the listeners out there of the Martial Arts Nation podcast a lot of things today. It was a lot to take in. I'm going to suggest to them that they should partake in this book. Again, myself, I don't want to sit and read it from cover to cover myself. Not to say that other people won't. It's a great read, but I want to savor it, and I think that's the way. And that this is just again my opinion, but I think that's how the book should be handled because it is such a large volume, and you're coming out with another edition, so it's like you just you want to let it seep. It's kind of like you said with your gardening, you pour the water in and let the water seep into the roots, right? And that's how I've chosen to work on the book or work with the book. And I want to thank you for all your time, Jonathan. Like I said, it's been great speaking with you, and I hope that we can continue on our relationship as we're all going through our own martial art journeys.
I
And
sure hope
it's
so.
been it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. And on behalf of the Martial Arts Nation podcast, three bows, sir, and us to you, and thanks for being here.
A big bow to you too. It's been a great conversation, and I was honored to be on your podcast.
Well, thank you, sir. And with that said, this has been Jonathan Bluestein, author of Research of Martial Arts, here with us today. And again, thank you, and have yourself a great day, big sir.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. See you soon.